Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Oil and gas is big business in Oklahoma, and in the midst of the latest boom, some landowners are finding drilling mud application as a way to earn extra money. To begin examining the topic, let's start with the latest research and contract laws. Here's SUNUP's Dave Deacon.
If you have land across the state, you may be approached about applying mud to your land, and we have Chad Penn here to talk to us about some of the questions that producers should be asking whenever they are approached about mud.
Yeah, the first thing they should know is what type of mud is it to be applied. There's two main broad types of drilling mud,
right.
And the first one is water-based mud. That's the most common, and the main matrix or solvent on that is water, and it has very high salinity, high amounts of salt. It can be very high in sodium. It depends on the well, depends on the region. And the other main type of mud is oil-based mud. It contains diesel in it, and
right.
The main potential risk of oil-based mud is TPH, or total petroleum-based hydrocarbons.
Okay, now can producers go ahead and plant a crop on that?
Yes, that's part of what we were examining in some of these research plots here, and particularly with regard to water-based mud.
Right.
A lot of guys, they'll receive the mud, and after it's sprayed, water-based mud is sprayed on, and then it's incorporated, and a lot of times it's planted directly into that.
So Chad, what are some of the risks that could happen from that?
Well, for water-based mud, the main risk is salt, salinity. So you could cause saline soil, but hopefully it's only temporarily. The rules are set by the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. There's a limit of 6,000 pounds per acre of total dissolved solids. That's a measure of saltiness. And if a soil has excessive salinity, then generally the plant will have a hard time taking up water, even when there is water in the soil. For oil-based mud, the main risk to be thinking of are the TPH, the total petroleum-based hydrocarbons, and those generally degrade. Microorganisms break down that oil-like material into carbon dioxide and water. But for the water-based mud, salts don't degrade, so you have to wait for rainfall and, of course, with time to slowly leach the salts out of the root zone.
There's a lot of variations across the state. There's a lot of crops being planted across the state. There's a lot of different soil types. How does this play into your decision for mud?
That's a good point. Also with the climate, we have tremendous variation in climate from one corner of the state to the other, and that will have a big impact on the question I get all the time from producers: what's going to happen when I apply this to my land? And it depends on all those factors that you mentioned. With the water-based mud, the lighter the soil, the sandier the soil, and the more rainfall you get, the less impact you'll have. The salts will be leached out of the root zone, and that's really the bottom line when it comes to water-based mud, is you want those salts to be leached out. And also with oil-based mud, if you have optimum conditions, temperature, moisture, oxygen, you'll degrade those hydrocarbons faster. So, and also different crops have varying thresholds, or tolerances, I should say, to salinity. For example, wheat varies from other crops that are more or less sensitive to it. And total petroleum-based hydrocarbons, same thing. So yeah, it does depend on a lot of factors, but rainfall is always going to help.
Okay, and the landowners, as a result, do get a payment for this. Let's talk about the difference between oil-based and water-based.
Okay, generally the going rate, and it varies some, but the landowner's paid based on a per barrel amount for the mud that he receives, and that's about 50 cents per barrel for water-based mud, and $1 per barrel for oil-based mud. So it depends on the size of the well.
What should producers consider whenever they receive the mud?
I think that the number one factor in determining whether or not they should receive the mud on their farm is the reputation of the land application company, the quality of the operator. The OCC website, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, has on public record all of the permits that have been granted in Oklahoma for every company and anyone who's been fined.
Well, thank you much, Chad. And for more information, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Continuing our conversation now on the application of drillers' muds, we turn to our ag lawyer, Shannon Farrell. Shannon, let's talk about these. It's pretty important to have an actual written contract in place, signed, T's crossed, I's dotted before you get started.
Well, absolutely, because if application is done right, and according to the regulations, it really shouldn't cause that many problems. But the problem that we do have is that there are some disreputable applicators out there. There's some people that don't know or don't follow the regulations. And so you need the written agreement to make sure that both the parties are on the same page about how you're going to go about applying this fluid to the landowner's property.
All right, let's talk about the mud itself. What can you actually specify in that contract about the mud being applied?
Well, of course, one thing that I would always try to include in agreements is make it explicit that the applicator is going to follow all of the applicable Oklahoma Corporation Commission regulations, but the regulations are fairly limited, and there may be more that you want to know about the fluid than is required by the regulations. I'll give you an example. The regulations only require that mud be tested for its electrical conductivity, which basically is a measure of how saline it is, and total petroleum hydrocarbons, or you'll hear that called TPH, or total oil and grease. That's basically a measure of how many hydrocarbons are actually in the fluid. But beyond that, there's no requirement for testing. So if you want to know more as the landowner about things like heavy metals, radioactivity, any of those issues, you need to specify in the agreement that the applicator is going to provide you that analysis before the application, because it's not required by the rules.
Okay. Let's talk about where this mud can actually be applied. What are the restrictions there?
The regulations have certain restrictions about application distances from things like water bodies, water wells, property boundaries, and things of that sort, but that's it. So if there are other areas that you want them to stay away from, you need to specify that for them in two ways. Number one, make sure that's written into the agreement, and number two, get an aerial photograph, for example, from NRCS, and actually indicate on that map, I do want application here, I don't want application here. So you might have setbacks from things like your house, your barn, wildlife habitat that you're trying to protect for hunting purposes. Make it as easy as possible for the applicator to stay away from those areas by giving them a visual.
How do we deal with existing tenants in the contract?
You know, we've gotten a lot of questions like that at OSU, because landlords are the ones that are being applied because they're the ones that are typically in the land records. And so sometimes the landlords will allow application without thinking about the implications that that has for their tenant. And as a matter of fact, there's probably pretty good legal grounds to say it's illegal for you to allow that if you have a tenant in possession of your property without getting their permission in advance. So two ways of doing that. Number one, you can approach your tenant and say, hey, we're thinking about this. Let's all get at the table and negotiate this land application agreement together. Or proactively, the next time that you have a written lease with your tenant, address that within the lease and say either we're not going to apply fluid to the properties that are being leased, or if we do have application, here's how we're going to compensate both the tenant and the landowner.
What does land application do towards crop insurance?
Well, from talking to several crop insurance providers, what we found is that in almost all circumstances, if you apply drilling fluid to a growing crop, that's going to void your policy for that year. So you will lose your coverage for that year. There's a lot more disagreement, though, about the impacts going forward from that. If you apply the fluid and it does cause a loss in yield, obviously that's going to affect the yield calculations that determine your recovery under the insurance policies. But the insurance industry is kind of trying to catch up to this, because this is, has blossomed so quickly. The policies haven't quite caught up to it yet. So in the next few years, I think we'll see policies address in broader detail what you can and can't do with respect to insured lands.
All right, now last thing, and I guess the happiest part of this conversation for producers, how do we get paid? And how do we put that in the contract?
Because most people don't do this for fun. They do it because they actually expect to get paid.
Right.
So you need to specify in the contract how much you're going to be paid. And in most cases in Oklahoma, that's based on a volume basis. In other words, how many barrels of fluid are applied to the property. That's how the landowner is going to be paid. So make sure that's specified. How you're going to get paid. What happens if you don't get paid? What procedures can you follow to get interest for the delay in the payment?
All right, good information as always. Shannon Farrell, the Ag Law Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
We're into that portion of the spring and early summer that should be the peak of lactation for our spring calving beef cows. This would be an excellent time for producers to walk out through the herd with their cow record book and write down any of the cows that they think might have a bad udder. That would give them then an opportunity to find those cows again next fall at calf weaning time and perhaps cull them from the herd. Research here at Oklahoma State University a number of years ago has shown us that if a cow has one or two bad quarters, the reduction in weaning weight is really quite substantial. The data here suggested it could be as much as 50 to 60 pounds. And that's quite a substantial amount when you consider the price of calves in today's marketplace. The udder soundnesses, or lack of soundnesses, that we ought to be looking for come in two general categories. Number one, watch for those cows that have the very large funnel-shaped teat. Chances are the calf is not nursing on it anyway. It might have mastitis and is a dry quarter. Also, those with that very large teat, it's difficult for next year's baby calf to get its mouth around it, and therefore is going to be less likely to get the milk with the first milk, the colostrum in it, in time to really give that calf some disease protection. Also, take a watch and look for those cows that have a broken down, what we call a suspensory ligament. That's the ligament that divides the left half of the udder from the right half of the udder. Over time, as the cows age, that will break down and allow that udder to get closer and closer to the ground. Again, one of the key problems is when the baby calf first is born, eventually gets to his feet and starts nosing around to find the teat, he tends to reach up much higher than that low-hanging udder and may take too much time before he actually ingests the colostrum that we want that baby calf to get within the first 6 hours of life. We know that udder soundness is heritable, perhaps about 20 to 30% heritable. We can make some real improvement in our herd over time by selecting against cows with bad udders and also not keeping their daughters. So keep this in mind as we go through this spring and summer time frame. Watch for the cows with bad udders. Let's cull them next fall, and we can improve our overall cow herd productivity. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Joining us now is Gant Maurer, the Beef Value Added Specialist here at Oklahoma State University. Now, Gant, you work with the OQBN program here in the state. Just for those who aren't real familiar with the program, give us a brief rundown. What is OQBN?
OQBN is the Oklahoma Quality Beef Network, and at its core point, it's a relationship between all segments of the beef industry. It consists of producers, veterinarians, extension personnel, and industry representatives. And again, we want to increase communication through all segments of the beef industry to add value to our cow herd within the state of Oklahoma.
All right, now rather famously, and that is the Vac-45 program as a sale program. Tell us how that works.
Yep, absolutely. One way to add premiums or get people involved with OQBN is through the Vac-45 program. And it consists of producer doing management practices, which consist of a vaccination program, castrating those steer calves, dehorning those calves, and following through those management requirements. And then OSU, myself, or one of our county extension personnel verify those calves. A producer has the option, but are not required to market those calves in an OQBN Vac-45 certified sale. But traditionally our sales are through the fall and at several different livestock auction markets throughout the state.
All right. Now you've got a chance to look back at this past year and the marketing you did there. How does the program shape up this last year?
You know, we were fairly successful this year. Premiums overall were about $9.50 a hundredweight for our calves. Steer premiums for OQBN calves was $13.50 a hundredweight as compared to a balling calf or a non-weaned calf going through the sale barn. One other thing that's unique is that due to the drought, we had less calves per producer participate in the program. However, we had more producers involved in the program to maintain our cow numbers going through that Vac-45 sale. So we've had a lot of buy-in, and I think we'll continue that buy-in as we go into next fall.
Very good. So it's really been successful for those folks. But I guess now this coming year, you're gonna have an opportunity for some people who maybe weren't involved before.
Right. One thing or one request that I've had from a lot of producers is a OQBN, we're gonna call it an OQBN preconditioned program. And this is for cattle that have been bought and put together at the sale barn. Our Vac-45 program is only for home-raised calves for that cow-calf producer. But if a producer wishes, he can purchase those cattle in a stalker type program program, and again, we'll verify those calves if they meet management type requirements. And this type of program, again, will pertain to stocker operators that have summer grass pasture, or also stocker operators that are going to graze those cattle on wheat pasture throughout the winter time. Traditionally, all the numbers indicate that we may see a premium anywhere from $5 to $7 a hundredweight on those particular calves is what the research shows, and again, it'll be a brand new program this fall, so we'll have to see where those premiums actually fall. Another thing, Austin, is we're setting our dates for our OQBN sales as we speak, and it'll be on our webpage for people to look at and plan their weaning strategies as we get into this fall.
Very good. Now, if you'd like to take a look at that website, you can find a link off ours, sunup.okstate.edu.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet weather report. Rain, wind, and hail have turned into weekly events this April and May. In some weeks, these have been pretty localized, at times widespread. That means rainfall has been an ever-changing picture. A 30-day map of rainfall from May 1st through Wednesday, May 29th, shows that over most of May, a lot of the state received 3 inches or more. West of a jagged line from Medford to Weatherford to Lawton, the rainfall amounts declined down to the blue areas that received 3/4 of an inch or less. With summer grasses and annuals growing rapidly, the water demand is rising rapidly. Monday, May 27th was a warm, windy day that pushed that day's evapotranspiration, a measure of water demand by plants and evaporation from the soil, to over a ½ inch of water out in the panhandle. Moving east in the area with more rainfall, the water demand for Monday was closer to 2/10 of an inch in most locations. The lower rainfall and increased water demand shows up as the drier brown-colored areas on a map of plant available water from the surface down to 16 inches on Wednesday. Here's Gary with more rain and drought info.
Good morning, everybody. Certainly great to be back on SUNUP after a brief hiatus for 1 week, as I was dealing with an EF5 tornado passing about a ½ mile from my house and more last week, so everything turned out pretty well for us. Unfortunately, not so great for the rest of our community. So thoughts and prayers are certainly still welcome for the Moore and South Oklahoma City area. Let's take a look at another disaster Oklahoma's been facing over the last 2.5 to 3 years, and that's the drought. The latest U.S. Drought Monitor report still shows significant drought across western Oklahoma, especially in the Panhandle. We actually saw that D4 exceptional drought expand once again across far western Oklahoma into the Panhandle. So things are still pretty dire out there. They're dealing with their own multi-billion-dollar disaster. Now let's take a look forward into the summer months, and this is for the June through August period. These are the outlooks from the National Weather Service's Climate Prediction Center. And what we see here are probabilities. And for the precipitation probability map, we see increased odds of below normal precipitation for much of western Oklahoma, especially the Panhandle once again, which would be terrible news for those folks. And as for temperature, we see increased odds of above normal temperatures. Now, if these two things do come to fruition for the summer across western Oklahoma and the Panhandle, it's not going to be good news. So we definitely need more rains between now and when summer gets here to help forestall this type of prediction. So hopefully this current system, while bringing severe weather, will also bring us some good rainfall to western Oklahoma, including the Panhandle. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Hey Kim Anderson, our grain marketing specialist, joins us now. Kim, Oklahoma harvest is underway.
Yeah, we've cut a few loads down in southern Oklahoma. The yields were relatively good, 25, one load at up to 34 bushels per acre. The test weights were good, mostly above 60, some in the 58, 59, good number 1, number 2 wheat. And the protein tests that have been done have been relatively high. You know, we talked about protein, was concerned about protein. Well, the early indications, and it is very, very early, is that protein's going to be okay.
Okay, we'll see how the rest of harvest goes. Let's switch gears and talk about prices now. What's the latest?
Well, prices just been wandering around. You look at cash prices in Oklahoma, they've been ranging from $7.20 to $7.40, about an 18 to 20 cent price range. Kansas City Board of Trade, a 28, 29 cent price range over the last couple of weeks, from $7.31 to $7.59. You know, we've got that support at $7.31 and that resistance at $7.59 to break out of that. If you look at the basis, the old crop basis is a minus 23 to a minus 7, and the new crop basis is a minus 20 to a minus 25, which comes out to a forward contract price in Oklahoma for harvest delivered wheat, which we're getting mighty close, of about $7.25.
In terms of quality, looking at the region as a whole, not nearly as good as it was this time last year?
Well, the crop conditions are significantly below last year's level. If you look at the total U.S. winter wheat crop, it was 31% good to excellent. Oklahoma well below average for the U.S. at 17% good to excellent. That's compared to 73% last year good to excellent. Kansas a little better at 28% good to excellent versus last year at 39%. And Texas is really in the barrel this year at 7% good to excellent versus 34% last year.
And supply estimates for Oklahoma?
Well, if you look at the total production, right in the midpoint, 90, I think is probably a pretty good estimate.
And finally, June is here. We've been talking about it for months. What's that magic number for price?
I think I'm going to stick with $7.65. You know, the 5-year average is $6.40. The $7.25, I've been talking about that for the last couple months, so I think I'm just going to stick with that. Of course, if the crop comes in like the first few loads have, relatively good yields, then that price will probably go down. But the total revenue should be about the same, because the decrease in price will be offset by increase in production.
Okay, Kim Anderson, harvest is here. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Shop Stop. Today we want to talk a little bit about making your own mud box if you're doing that sheetrock work at home.
It's pretty simple. You can buy these, but you know, basically you can build it out of scrap materials. And what it consists of is you got your tape on in this compartment, you've got this compartment for your mud, and you have in their separating compartments, you just raise this enough to run your tape through, and this one enough to be able to pull that through, and your mud will be placed on your tape just nice and pretty like that.
So just a couple pieces of scrap plywood, some Masonite on the sides, you get a little mud on your tape, and then it's easy enough to take that and put it right straight onto the joint.
So that's a poor man's mud box that you can make in just a few minutes at home.
That's it this week on Shop Stop. We'll see you next time.
Now back to the issue of oil and gas, and some more information for farmers whose crops may be impacted by seismic crews. As oil derricks appear on the horizon across Noble County, a few words of caution from Oklahoma State University farm management specialist Eric DeVeest.
Well, in order to know how these shale veins lie underground, they're doing seismographic surveys. And so they come out and with a helicopter, they actually laid some detection equipment out in these fields, and then they drive these big rigs out through here that look a lot like a four-wheel drive tractor. And people driving north of Stillwater will see these tracks out in fields, and they're causing significant damage, as you can see out here in these crop fields.
Although irrigation and fertilizer tracks are common, the larger tracks can cause noticeable crop loss.
As you can see, this wheat
was in the flowering stage when they came out here. And there's nothing in these heads, and even if there was, with them laying on the ground, there's no way we're going to get them harvested. So although it doesn't look like there might be a huge amount of damage out here, the crop insurance adjuster said 7% of the yield is laying on the ground out here and won't be harvested. So if you haven't talked to your crop insurance agent about this, what you're looking at is 7% loss on your reported yield, and that's going to carry for 5 years, affecting your APH, which is what is used to calculate your insurable yield and compute losses in the future.
That means this year's average will affect the next 5 years of insurable levels and payments.
And with the new farm bills that are moving through the House and the Senate, both of those bills have something called a shallow loss coverage, which means typically if, say, you bought up 70% of you bought a 70% policy coverage on your crop, that additional 30% or whatever your deductible is, under the new farm bills, that you're going to be able to buy a second policy if you want to cover that. So what we're looking at here is lost future crop insurance payments if they happen. And so what we're encouraging producers to do is call their crop insurance agent, get an adjuster out in their fields, and they can add this yield back into their APH so it won't carry over for the next 5 years, dragging down their insurable levels and future indemnity payments.
For more information on crop damage issues, be sure to contact your county extension educator or your crop insurance agent. That does it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a nice week, everyone. We'll see you next time at SUNUP.